Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We're going to talk about interpreter education, but to get started, if you would please introduce yourself, a little bit about your academic background and current employment.
Absolutely. I am Pamela Collins, born in Washington, D.C., raised in Columbia, Maryland. Later moved to Atlanta, Georgia with my now husband, where I got involved with interpreting at a local church. And thank goodness the ministry leader there said, you don't just do this, you have to go to school. And after the first class, I fell in love with the language, the culture, the people, and then they pushed me. They, being the community that I learned with, the Black deaf community in Georgia, as well as the white deaf community in Georgia, encouraged me to take the next steps to becoming an interpreter. So I just didn't stop after that. I completed an interpreter training program, moved back to the Maryland area, went to Catonsville Community College, or CCBC, and got my AA there in interpreting. Still wanted more. Moved to Gallaudet University and got my degree in ASL there. I had to convince MJ that I was not getting that degree to teach deaf students, not my idea, but I did want to know what teachers were teaching interpreter teachers. What did they want these teachers to teach students? That's what I wanted to know. And then after that, I got my master's in administration and supervision, and I'm currently pursuing my doctorate at Gallaudet University.
Wonderful. What are your current research interests?
An institutional ethnographic exploration of getting scheduled. So in days of old, not to glorify those days because, they have some problems of their own, but scheduling, or this idea of a deaf person somewhere needing an interpreter, or some service company needing an interpreter, started with, I need an interpreter. And usually in the community, a deaf person would say, hey, Pam, are you available for this thing? I have a meeting on Monday. And I'd say, well, what is it? And they'd tell me what it was. I'd look at my calendar and we'd agree. That was scheduling. Nowadays, scheduling is taken up into a larger institutional system that involves more than just the deaf consumer and the interpreter. And it involves a whole host of people that I'm trying to shed a light on in terms of decision making. So now when someone says, I need an interpreter, what happens? An interpreter is provided. We make a lot of assumptions about what we think that is. The further we are removed from the interpreting field, the more problematic things become in terms of decision making. So I am trying to shed a light, make visible what's happening with scheduling so that we can make some decisions about what happens next. I think the primary focus is on the people that are involved, because we typically blame, it's become this them and us between schedulers and interpreters. They don't know what we're doing. Well, we've got to get these schedules filled. And so it's this contentious battle between valuable stakeholders in the community. I just think we grew so fast that we forgot to include schedulers who are not just administrative assistants or admin assistants, or if you look at the job descriptions, good with people, customer service savvy. And yes, you check all of those boxes, but they are also now positioned to make decisions on our behalf. And me questioning some of those decisions then looks like I'm questioning the person. So institutional ethnography moves past people and into the systems that have people do what they do. So if we really want to know how a vacuum cleaner works, we're going to move past just saying it sucks dirt, right? We're going to open up the machine and look at it and see why it sucks up dirt. How does it do that? What does each valve do? How does it, that way when it's broken, we don't have to get rid of the whole thing. We can maybe go in and fix it, or maybe we do have to get rid of the whole thing, who knows? And that's my approach to looking at scheduling and how it's impacting the field.
I've never thought about that really. I mean, I know that sometimes there'll be a person in a scheduling position who isn't able to assess interpreters' skills, whether that be linguistic skills, the ability to adapt, interpersonal skills, and then in the deaf community with the language profiles that are so greatly diverse, having a scheduler that doesn't even know how to find and like what skills are you bringing and what skills are required.
And it's not their fault. Most times they're in positions where some manager or some institution that they're a part of or some system that they're embedded in requires them to face supply and demand. You have X number of interpreters and Y number of jobs and fill those, right? We have these must fill, this discourse that shows up in our community, must fill, vetted, qualified, certified, that all becomes institutional knowledge. But if the job description of the person that we're hiring now to manage the business of interpreting is what I like to call it, because we've grown so fast, it's in reaction to the need in the community. The individuals that we've hired, do we train them? Because at one time when it was me, the interpreter, involved in the decision making and the deaf consumer involved in the decision making, we came together to create the RID Code of Ethics. We have RID, we have NAD, we have all of these organizations all centered around making sure that as what we do became a profession, that we're doing all the right things. We can't stop that. It's not just a one and done. We're now inviting another group of people in that are involved in more than just, we make it seem like they're secretaries or, like I said, admin assistants, where they're just taking a schedule. But it's more than that, because they'll come to me and say, Pam, you're perfect for this. Well, why am I perfect for this job? And oftentimes, why they thought I was isn't right. It didn't quite line up. I get where you were going, but I'm not Ethiopian. So that job you just put me on, yes, I look like those beautiful people, and I'm honored, but
do you feel that today, in your experience, is interpreter education as it stands today adequate?
no, I feel it often feels like a little bit of a science project for me. You know, a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and and who's deciding what little bit of what that we're putting into it? I recently had a favorite teacher, one of my favorite teachers, Faith Powell, remind me that in the early days we were connected to the community, and so we got that organic, direct, those lessons that we really can't replicate, right? And she likened it to a copier machine where we got this great experience and now we're trying to give it to cohort after cohort after cohort after cohort. But it's like a copier machine. You after a while, that copy that you're trying to make, it's not direct anymore. So you're trying to replicate what you experienced, and every time you make a copy, it loses a little something. And I feel like we're in that place of where some of what we have, it doesn't even look anything like what I started with.
Right. And not to mention that, but I'm not myself deaf. So not only it's me giving you, well, this is what I know from this community.
From my experience, yes.
As a person who's not
Yes.
deaf myself, and then however many generations away from the original source. Yeah, that's a wonderful analogy. Why is it so important to have highly qualified interpreters and an adequate pool of highly qualified interpreters?
Well, I look at it as, it's communication access, right? So oftentimes people talk about language and access to language and why we get into this field to begin with. And if we move past, did I sign that right? Did I do that right? Do I know? This is the ability to be able to communicate in a way where a group of individuals are dependent upon the interpreter, deaf and hearing, to be clear enough to articulate whatever it is that they are trying to gain access to. So having qualified interpreters, it's more than just, why do we need them? For communication to happen. If we don't have that, then communication is not happening, and so we're not interpreting. And so what are we doing if communication is not happening?
Yes. And the impact of that communication maybe not only being not native, not comfortable, but being fraught with some assumptions or some just a little something missing, so that there's a higher burden on trying to figure out the message as well as being able to focus on the interaction itself.
Well, absolutely. We've created this idea that, you come to an interpreter training program, you matriculate through the program, you graduate, next steps, you can become an interpreter. And I'm saying it's not necessarily the case. I ask some of the students, how old are you? And they'll say 6 months or a year. And I say, do you remember when you were 6 months old? What your English sounded like at that point? It was a little bit of a babble, not quite sure, playing around with things. But we then think that we can take that and interpret without having the training. And I think that's for deaf and hearing, because I know English doesn't mean I should go teach an English class, right? I know how to use it, but do I know how to teach it? So I think that we are being reactive right now and trying to, it's almost like the schedulers, X number of them and Y number of them, and trying to address the need. But in some ways, I think we need to just stop for a second, regroup with all the stakeholders involved. What are we doing? What are we missing? What's needed? What's the approach? How do we do this before we move forward? Because right now, I just feel like if I think of our footprint in the community, right now, we're just kind of stomping through and figuring it out along the way. That's what it feels like.
Yeah, some stomping, some treadmill, some like the little hamster. Yeah, and sometimes I feel like, as an educator, sometimes I feel like I'm barely keeping my head above the water.
Well, yeah, where does creativity come into it when you feel overloaded with just making sure you're managing, there's not enough teachers, or in my experience right now, I feel like I feel like someone should have thought it was a good idea when we started to see our pain points in the community with scheduling, with RID and NAD, we didn't get in front of it. Some of the interpreter training programs, you would think there would have been some type of meeting as to, okay, what happens now? How do we approach this? How do we address this? How is this going to show up in the classroom? How is this going to show up in our curriculum? How is this going to show up in our teaching? What are we going to do different? Nothing seems, even here at the conference, like I would have liked to have had a workshop on really what's happening out here. And what are we doing in our classrooms? And how are we, addressing some of the issues that we find ourselves in? It's not, we can't just smile and keep teaching. It's not working.
Yeah, I would love to have the opportunity to sit down and do some more. Let's bring some strategies into this. I think it's pretty clear there's a problem. For me personally, it's much larger than me, which is why I decided to do this video project with some people that I know and love and trust and am honored to work with. And then through this process of interviewing, I see you share my story, and I feel like this is it. We all have ideas, or we all have an expertise. And in my little institution where I worked alone as a full-time instructor for 18 years, I'm like, I don't know how, I feel like I made some changes in the institution, and now that I've been there for 20 years, I'm like, it's still not enough.
And it's almost like spitting on an inferno. Sorry, but that's what it feels like at this point. Or it's a big forest fire, and we're kind of, we need something bigger. We need something with teeth. We need to stop talking about what we need to talk about, or meeting about the meeting, about what we should do, and do something. And I don't care if it's something that doesn't quite work out at first. Let's come together and do something. We fail, we learn from that. Let's keep doing with all the stakeholders involved until we see the change.
It's beautiful. I'm very happy to have the honor to sit down and chat with you and get to know you a little bit more and hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. I want to add one more thing.
Oh, please.
I look out and I see a number of issues showing up in the community. A lot of Latino, African American, and Asian students often come, deaf and hearing, expressing a need to feel engaged and seen and supported. And while we're thinking about all this that we're talking about, let's really do something about these students that are sitting in our classrooms that feel like the curriculum currently is not designed for them. Let's connect with the organizations, deaf organizations that are out there who've been around for some time, MBDA, I know locally, DCA, BDA. Let's connect with them and find out how to really get to even that element of teaching that I feel like has been missing in the profession for a while.
I would like to ask you to clarify for me, please, for those who are not familiar with NBDA.
I'm sorry. National Black Deaf Advocates.
So National Black Deaf Advocates, tell me about the strength, tell me about what this agency, what this organization can provide and must provide as an integral part of curriculum development.
So National Black Deaf Advocates is a member-run organization of Black individuals from various parts of the community who came together at a time, to talk about issues that they felt impacted them, that they did not feel were being addressed in other organizations, right? And they looked around and noticed that there weren't very many Black interpreters, Latino interpreters, Asian interpreters, and they started this idea of growing their own and connecting interpreters, new interpreters, students, anyone who's interested, with the experience of the community. And I think that's what we're all lacking, this connection back to the community. Instead of the mom and pop store, we have Costco and Walmart. So they are able to, talk about their history of being Black and deaf in the larger deaf community, what that experience was like, capturing some of their lived experience, using that to show students today who still feel invisible, to show how they were able to matriculate through, and use those as teaching tools. Because what happens when you have diverse experiences, it's just going to be an organic experience. It doesn't have to be, it's Black History Month, we're going to do it just for this month. They are just included into the curriculum, not as a one-off, not as a special program, but just period. If we look and we see anyone's voice or story is missing, we have to make sure that we include those stories back into the story, because the story includes all of us. And if we look and we just see one group of people, then there are a lot of voices that are missing from the story.
And we're talking a lot in our profession, we're talking about power and privilege and social justice. And you can talk about the deaf community, and you can also talk about the history of immigrants and people of color in our country, and the horrible oppression of Native people not in our country. And then you, on top of that, you add the deafness component and the piece that they were not even provided access, and that was okay. And how many decades, how many generations will it take to catch up with no resources? I don't believe that's possible. Yeah.
Is there ever a catch-up? Do we ever? But imagine that in the classroom. Imagine having those discussions in the classroom. That's rich.
Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.